Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. In this video, we will set up the pagination functionality of our API and also implement the Pokemon list so that we can then finally load all the Pokemon into our app. We will start with the pagination functionality and then implement the actual list in which we'll load the results. We will go to the Pokemon list view model because pagination is business logic and loading the data is something that is done in the repository, which we already did, but now we need to write the logic to only load like 20 entries at once, and that will be done here in the view model. We want to start by defining some variables here. On the one hand, that is a private variable current page, which will be set to 0 initially, so that is just the page we're currently at. So we start to load the first page, which is 0 here. When we then scroll down, we will load the next page, so we'll increment that variable and so on. And now we will have a bunch of states here that we will keep in our view model for our actual composable list. Initially, with view models, we used things like live data, state flow or so. We can still theoretically use that here, and there is a function that converts state flow and live data to a state, but we can also directly create compose states, which is the better option here in my opinion. Of course, if you need the functionality of flows, then I would create a state flow. And for example, if you need to map the results or do whatever with those, then use flows first and then convert that to a compose state. First of all, we will have a public variable here for a Pokemon list, which will be the actual list of Pokemon, which will be equal to mutable state of an empty list. And the type of that list will be a list of Pokédex list entries. And then we will have a variable for the load error. So if something goes wrong, that will just be a string that we will display in our app. So mutable state of an empty string by default. We will have a variable isLoading to display a progress bar, which is a mutable state of false initially. And we will have a variable end reached. So if we reached the end of the Pokemon list and we want to stop pagination, that will also be false by default. And one more variable I will put into our constants file, which is the page size. So how many Pokemon we load at once, which I'll default to 20, but you can then easily change that later. And then here in our view model, we will write a function load Pokemon paginated. That won't take any parameters because we will just load the next set of Pokemon. In here we will launch a coroutine in ViewModel scope because we need to make the API request here, which we can save in a result variable using our repository .getPokemonList. The limit, so how many Pokemon we want to load at once, will be the page size variable we declared before. Import that from our constants. And the offset, so from which Pokemon we basically want to start, will be our current page times that page size. So initially current page is 0, so the offset will also be 0. When that is 1, so if we loaded the first 20 Pokemon, then we will set this offset to 1 times 20, so we will load the 21th Pokemon, and so on. And since this result now is a resource, we can check in a when expression if that is successful or an error. When that is a resource dot success import resource, we can do this. If it's resource.error, we can do this. And I think I added a loading resource here, which we actually don't need in this app. So in our resource class, you can see I added this loading resource class here inside of the sealed class, which is very useful in many scenarios, but not in ours here. You can still keep it to always reuse that resource class in your other projects, but I will remove this loading resource class here for now because we have our own loading handling functionality here with this mutable state. And now we can just distinguish if loading the results from the API was successful or not. And by the way, before we actually load the results here, we want to set isLoading.value to true. And here in this success case, we first of all want to set endReached.value to current page times page size, if that is greater than or equal to our result.data nullCheck.count. So all that means is that we currently loaded more entries than our result set actually contains. So this count is how many Pokemon there are actually in total. And now we have a little issue here, that if we take a look in our API here, if we request this Pokemon list, then we will get such a response here. And this is, by the way, this count variable that we just compared. But the issue here is that we only get a list of Pokemon names and URLs to those Pokemon, but we don't get the image URLs. So we only get the image URLs if we query each Pokemon individually. And of course, we don't want to do this, because if you remember, this response for that contained 11,000 lines of JSON code, which is terrible here. So that is not an option to query each Pokemon individually here. But a solution and a little fix, a workaround that we can make use of here is using these numbers that we get here in this URL for each Pokemon. Because all we need is the number actually to get the specific image URL of a Pokemon, because the rest of the URL for the image will stay the same. So what we will now do in our ViewModel is, for each URL, we will just parse this number basically that is at the end of this URL. We'll remove this trailing slash and then just get the digit or the numbers that follow or that are before that slash actually. So we want to go back to Android Studio, and right here we want to get our Pokédex entries by using result data nullCheck, which is not needed here, that results, which is, you can see, of this result type here, which is not yet of our Pokédex list entry type, but we want to have this list as a list of Pokédex list entries. So we need to map that. We will use map indexed, so we also get a reference to the current index. I'll rename this to entry, and here we now want to parse this number from this URL, as I just explained, and that is equal to if entry.url ends with, if it ends with such a slash, then we want to get this number from entry.url drop last one, so we just drop the last character, which is this slash, and then we take last while it.isDigit. So all that does here is, let's go inside of our browser, can't even talk anymore. What this does is, it will remove the trailing slash here, and then it will take the characters from the end as long as they are a digit. So it will check after that trailing slash, okay, is that one a digit? Yes, it is. Is that second one a digit? Yes, it is. Is that slash a digit? No, it's not. So it will take that 11. And just in case this does not start with a, this does not end with a slash, we want to have a second option here, else. Then we will just copy this and just won't drop the last character. And then with the help of this number we just parsed, we can get the actual image URL to that Pokemon, which is this. And you can see at the end here, this number just refers to the number of the Pokemon we want to get the image from, and the rest stays the same. So we can just replace this with number. And then we can construct a Pokédex list entry, so we just map these result entries to our Pokédex list entry class, which needs a Pokemon name, which is entry.name.capitalize, because that is in lower letters, and we want to have it start with a capital letter. We pass locale.root. The image URL will be URL, and the number will be number. And actually convert that to an integer here. Then, that is now our list of loaded Pokemon. Now we want to increase the current page variable by 1, because now we want to load the next page when we call this function. We want to reset the load errors, so if something went wrong before, now that we got a successful response, we know that is not the case anymore. So we set that to an empty string. We want to set is loading that value to false, because now we're not loading anymore. And we want to set our Pokemon list that value. So we set plus equals our Pokédex entries. So we just add these loaded entries to our Pokemon list, which will be the list with all Pokemon, and this is the list with only the newly paginated Pokemon. And in case we get an error here, we just assign that error to a load error.value, which is result.message, and we assert this is not equal to null, and we can set is loading.value to false, because also if we get an error, we're not loading anymore. But that is actually already it for the business logic of the pagination. You can see how easy that is. Of course, this looks a little bit more complicated, but this is only because our API that we use here doesn't provide us these image URLs right away. But you will now see how easy that is as well if we just have a lazy column, so a list in which we will load these entries now paginated. For that, I want to go back to Pokemon list screen. And here above this Pokédex entry, we will have a composable function called Pokemon list that will take the nav controller. And it needs a reference to our ViewModel, which is our Pokemon list ViewModel set equal to hild navgraph ViewModel. You also know this. And now first we want to get references to the states we defined in the ViewModel. First of all, our Pokemon list by remember. ViewModel, not that one. ViewModel.Pokemon list. Then endReached by remember. ViewModel.endReached. Val, can actually just duplicate this. We have a val load error. This one load error, and finally what else is loading, like this. Then down here we will have a lazy column, so we can just lazily load these entries. If you don't know what a lazy column is, it's basically the equivalent of recycler view in Jetpack Compose. We want to add a little bit of padding here to these single entries in our list, so we set content padding to padding values 16 dp to just add 16 dp of padding from all sides. And now this Pokemon list contains as many entries as it loaded Pokemon, but in our app we actually load 2 Pokemon per row. And for our lazy column list here, one row that consists of 2 Pokemon is actually considered as one item. So we need to make a little calculation here for the item count. So if Pokemon list that size modulo 2 is equal to 0, so if we have an even number of Pokemon in our list, then we can just divide this Pokemon list that size by 2, because we have 2 Pokemon per entry. And let's do it like this. And else, if we have an odd number of Pokemon in our list, we set this to Pokemon list that size divided by 2, and we add this one additional entry on top of that, because this integer division will just always round to the bottom, and in case we have an odd number of Pokemon, let's say 5, this would result in 2, because 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, rounded to the bottom is 2, and then we add that one row on top of that, so we can also display the 5th Pokemon. Now below that we can specify items to just tell our lazy column, now come the items. We have item count items, and in here we can specify the composables for these items. And these are just Pokédex rows. The row index is just it, that refers to the current index of that items block here. The entries is our Pokemon list, and the nav controller is our nav controller. And it's really as easy as that. But how can we now detect when we should paginate? So when we scroll to the bottom, we of course want to call the function in our ViewModel to load our next Pokemon that will then get added to this state and also added to this list here, of course. Now you will see how easy that is with Compose. Before we had to use something like the paging library, or that even made it easier for us, but that was still a huge setup. It was a real pain to detect with recycler views if we scroll to the bottom or not. In Compose, we can check if the current index is greater than or equal to our item count minus 1. That's it. If that is true, we know we scroll to the bottom. And then we can paginate. But of course, we also want to check if our end is not reached, because then we don't want to paginate. But if those two conditions are true, we can use our ViewModel and load Pokemon Paginated. That will then add the new Pokemon to this Pokemon list, which will add these also to this lazy column list here, because we use these here in our Pokédex row. Now that is enough to actually display the list of Pokemon. If we scroll up and also add this Pokemon list composable to our Pokemon list screen composable, below our search bar, let's add a little space here as well. Spacer modifier dot height, give it 16 dp of height, and then use our Pokemon lists and pass the nav controller. So right now we don't initially load the list when we actually open the app, so we don't call this load Pokemon paginated function by default when we started it. So we're going to go to our ViewModel and just call that in the init block. Load Pokemon Paginated. And if we then run the app and check the emulator, it crashes. Let's see why. Open logcat. Filter for errors. What is it? Missing internet permission. Ooh, let's go to the manifest file and quickly add that. Uses permission internet. And relaunch the app. And we don't see anything. Okay, let's see in the logcat again. Do we get an error? No. Oh, here's one. Socket exception, socket failed ePerm. Oh, okay. Sometimes we get that weird error with retrofit, this ePerm error. What we need to do is we need to just reinstall that app, and then it will work. So let's do that right here. Uninstall this. Okay, relaunch the app. Take a look now. Hopefully it works. And yeah, you can see now it loads Pokemon, and we can scroll. It paginates. And yeah, that seems to work just fine. But what doesn't work right now is if something goes wrong, we're not notified about that, and we have no option to retry basically loading the Pokemon. And that is also what I want to do in this video, which is very easy. Just in our Pokemon list screen, we want to scroll completely to the bottom, and here I will add a composable, which will be the retry section, which will display the error and the option to retry loading using a button. So the error will be a string, and on retry, so when we click on that button, we call this lambda function. This will just be a column in the end, which will display a text composable using this error, setting the color of that text to color.red for an error color, and we want to set the font size to 18sp. We want to add a little space, which is modifier.height 8dp, and then we will add our button. So a button, when we click on this button, we want to call on retry, and the text of this button will just be retry. Let's also center this button using a modifier. modifier is equal to modifier dot align, and we want to align that button center horizontally. And that is it for this retry section. Now we can scroll up to our Pokemon list, and here below this lazy column we will just have a box in which we'll display that retry section if there actually was an error. So box, we want to set content alignment to center, and we want to set a modifier to modifier dot fill max size, so we can just center that section in our whole screen basically. And in that box we can check if we're currently loading. Then we want to display a progress bar, so circular progress indicator. I'll set the color equal to material theme.colors.primary. And if our load error, which is just a string, if that is not empty, we know that we get an error. So we display our retry section with that load error. And when we click on this retry section button, then we just call ViewModel load Pokemon paginated. If we now relaunch the app, take a look here and make sure to go inside of incognito mode, not incognito mode, airplane mode. And then you can see now we get our error text, which is just defaulted to an unknown error occurred. But if you're serious with your app, then you can make more detailed error handling and display that here. And if we click retry, then nothing happens because we still don't have internet connection. If we enable this again, click retry, then our Pokemon are loading. So everything is working perfectly fine. Thanks for watching this far. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, of course. Make sure to like this video. Make sure to comment below for engagement. And I will be very happy to see you in the next video again. Have a nice day. Bye bye.